Welcome to Weather Extra. I'm First Alert Meteorologist Jillian Johnson. The southeastern United States was devastatingly hit by a massive Category 4 hurricane late last week. Nearly the entire state of Florida was placed under some sort of tropical weather alert, with tropical storm warnings extending hundreds of miles inland into Georgia and the Carolinas. We get Weather Extra started this week by taking a look back at Hurricane Helene. Helene became the 8th named storm, the 5th hurricane, and the 2nd major hurricane to develop during this year's Atlantic hurricane season. Before unleashing its power across the southeastern United States, Helene battered Mexico's Gulf Coast with howling winds and heavy rains. This is the scene that many vacationers saw in Cancun during the middle of last week. As Helene entered the Gulf of Mexico, she would rapidly gain strength and quickly grow in size as the storm set its eyes upon the eastern Gulf Coast. The National Weather Service warned that due to Helene's massive size and incredible power, the impacts from the storm would be felt on an enormous scale and would extend over multiple states from Florida all the way up into the Carolinas and southern Appalachians. Hurricane force winds 75+ miles per hour or higher extended 60 miles from the storm's center, while tropical storm force winds extended outward nearly 400 miles. These winds would bring down power lines and trees all through the southeastern U.S. There was also a significant risk of life-threatening storm surge along the entire west coast of the Florida Peninsula, especially in Florida's Big Bend region, where Helene would move onshore Thursday. Before Helene made an official landfall, outer rain bands brought severe weather across the state of Florida. The west coast was also starting to see a rise in storm surge, many hours before Helene would move onshore. Now, Helene made landfall near Perry, Florida at 11:10 p.m. local time Thursday, September 26th. At the time of landfall, the storm had maximum winds of 140 miles per hour. That caused roofs to be blown off numerous homes and businesses, power lines to come crashing down, and many 100-year-old trees to be snapped to the ground. Since Helene came onshore as a Category 4, it's the strongest hurricane to make landfall in this part of Florida's coastline in more than 170 years. One of the most destructive impacts that Helene brought was what forecasters were calling catastrophic and unsurvivable storm surge. Record levels of storm surge were recorded up and down the entire west coast of Florida. The surge is so powerful, water was filling up quickly in many buildings, and some homes were even seen floating away down streets. Helene was a fast-moving storm, which didn't leave it much time to weaken as it moved into southern Georgia. The storm maintained its hurricane-force winds as it tore through heavily treed communities. Due to Helene's destructive winds and massive size, over 4 million Americans were left without power across Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas Friday morning. Helene would eventually weaken back down into a tropical storm in central Georgia, but she would continue to tear through communities across the southeast throughout the day Friday. Parts of South and North Carolina were inundated with non-stop heavy rain for hours upon hours as Helene moved northwest to further inland. Some of the highest rain totals and the most significant flooding occurred in communities in the southern Appalachian Mountains. In fact, the National Weather Service for that area called this weather event the most significant event to happen in the modern era. Asheville, North Carolina was a community hit very hard by Helene. Many were placed under mandatory evacuations as floodwaters rose. Here's the view of what locals were dealing with late last week. Helene traveled northwest and would continue to slowly lose strength, but still brought strong wind gusts and heavy rain into parts of the Midwest into the weekend. Daylight on Friday revealed the extent of destruction caused by Hurricane Helene in Perry, Florida, with fallen trees and power lines scattered on roads and buildings in the city seriously damaged. Now, again, the town of Perry took a direct hit from the powerful Category 4 storm. It's going to take a very long time to recover from the storm, but the morning after Helene struck, many in the community came outside to start cleaning up. The Atlantic hurricane season continues through the end of November, and there are signs that this season could still remain an active one, as forecasters predicted. We now turn to First Alert meteorologist Sean Bellafury, who has an update on the rest of the Atlantic hurricane season as we head into October. Sean.
2024 hurricane season continues to roll on. We have 2 more months left in the season, and those are typically less active months. October is, November not so much. But after Helene, we have already had 2 named storms. Kind of hard to believe, but yeah, and all the hubbub with Helene, and rightfully so, because of how dangerous and destructive of a system it was. We had 2 tropical systems that have kind of gone under the radar. The first one is Hurricane Isaac, which is a fish hurricane moving out to sea, no impact to land. The other tropical tropical system, which formed Friday morning, is Tropical Storm Joyce, another fish storm that's going to be moving its way towards the north and eventually fizzling out. There's another wave in behind that has a 30% chance of development, and another 30% chance of development has been painted across the western Caribbean Sea and the southern Gulf of Mexico. And this is something that we will have to kind of keep a close watch on here in central Texas. By the middle of next week is when that tropical wave may start to form across the western Caribbean. And even though it may form in nearly the same spots that we saw Hurricane Helene form in, this one could be moving across the Yucatan and enter into the Gulf of Mexico late next week. Will this happen? We don't know just yet, but the deeper into October we get, the harder and harder it gets for tropical systems to impact the Lone Star State. We'll keep an eye on that wave for you. And again, not immediate U.S. threat, but that system could bring us rain late this week. As we move into October and November, notice all the tropical activity starts to eventually fizzle away. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
The Gulf has been hit hard in terms of major hurricanes over the last decade. In fact, now including Helene, there have been 9 major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher, to hit Gulf Coast states in the last 8 years. 1 major hurricane hitting Texas, 3 in Louisiana, and 5 across the state of Florida, with 3 of those hitting in Florida's Big Bend region. And after being hit by Helene just this past week, nearly 2 years to the date, Hurricane Ian was also slamming into the west coast of Florida. Ian made landfall as a very strong Category 4 hurricane in southwest Florida on September 22nd back in 2022. Similar to Helene, Ian brought catastrophic storm surge and devastating wind impacts to many communities across the state. The storm would go on to cause around $113 billion in damage, making it the costliest hurricane in Florida's history, surpassing Irma of 2017, as well as the 3rd costliest in the nation's history, behind only Katrina of 2005 and Harvey of 2017. The storm caused 161 deaths, 150 of which were in the state of Florida. Moving on to a quick update on the Pacific hurricane season. A powerful hurricane hit along the southern Pacific coast of Mexico last week. John was a Category 3 hurricane at the time of landfall Monday night. According to the National Hurricane Center, John had maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour when it landed along the southern coast of Mexico. Life-threatening storm surge, hurricane-force wind gusts, and catastrophic amounts of rain slammed through coastal areas early last week. John blew 10 roofs off houses, toppled scores of trees, and triggered mudslides. 2 people died when a mudslide came crashing into their house on a remote mountain. Coming up next on Weather Extra, we are officially in fall, and you may be wondering when those fall colors will make their appearance this year. We spoke with an urban ecologist who provides more insight on that. Weather Extra will be right back with that and more. Welcome back to Weather Extra. With the fall season upon us, many may be wondering when the fall colors will make their appearance here in Central Texas. First Alert meteorologist C.D. Finley spoke with Allison Bayless, a regional urban ecologist from the Texas A&M Forest Service, to find out when we could see those leaves change and how the past weather conditions may have impacted what colors we see this year.
With the start of fall having happened on Sunday, September 22nd, the fall colors are not far behind in Central Texas. Of course, the big question is, how will they look this year? Despite the large amounts of rainfall that Central Texas has accumulated since the spring, some trees are still feeling the effects of drought from previous years, which could affect how the colors look this year.
It is nice that we got a little bit more rain this year and that a lot of counties in Central Texas aren't necessarily in a drought right now. But trees are certainly still stressed from the events of the past.
Regardless of the stress that trees are still experiencing, stress is not the only factor.
We really need to see too what the weather is going to be like in the fall, right before those leaves start changing. We like to see cold but not freezing temperatures, as well as more rain.
And fall has not gotten off to a very cool start. In fact, on the first day of fall on September 22nd, the high temperature was recorded at 96 degrees in Central Texas, which is 7 degrees above normal.
I have looked at a few different outlooks that predict the fall is going to be a little bit warmer and drier this year. Now, it is possible that some of that rain we got this summer will make up for the warmer and drier fall that we might have, but it's just too early to tell right now.
The fall colors are set to peak in late November for Central Texas. From KWTX, I am First Alert meteorologist C.D. Finley.
Each year, those vibrant fall colors take over trees across the nation, and you may wonder, why do certain leaves turn a certain color? Well, thankfully, Dan Smith has the answer in this moment of science.
Nature's fireworks are on full display across many parts of the country right now, and barely at all in others. Here's a primer on the how and why behind your favorite fall color changes. Chlorophyll is in every green plant you see. It's not the only ingredient in leaves, but it's how they make food from sunlight through photosynthesis. More sunlight in the summer months means those leaves stay nice and green. Suddenly, here comes that fall chill, and less sunlight too. A layer of cells cuts off leaf nutrients at the stem. The remaining chlorophyll in the leaf is broken down and eventually used up entirely before that leaf falls. But it's what that lack of chlorophyll reveals that makes for those flashy forest scenes. There are other types of pigments in leaves, after all. Carotenoids are produced in plant cells during the growing season, same as chlorophyll. That's what gives you your yellow and orange colors to those fall leaves, plus food like bananas, corn, and, well, carrots. It's right there in the name. Anthocyanins are your red, blue, and purple-hued natural features. They're only made in leaves during the fall as they take advantage of excess sugars. But year-round, they're found in red apples, cherries, blueberries, and the like. Also a good anti-inflammatory for us humans. Leaves change color while they're still attached to the tree, and for good reason. The tree conserves and reabsorbs that energy. When things warm up again, the growing leaves can then regenerate that broken down chlorophyll, or for remaining leaves in fall, turn just a little bit greener for a last hurrah in the waning weeks of the season. Waning sunlight is kind of inevitable, but local weather patterns play a major role in peak fall color. Your best bet lies with warm, dry, and sunny days coupled with cool and crisp nights, as long as it stays above freezing. Summer drought can also delay that peak by a few weeks. Final safety note: if you're going out leaf peeping this weekend, at 40 miles an hour, it would take you about 80 feet to stop a car. Wet roads double that stopping distance, and wet leaf-covered roads are more than triple. Hands on the wheel and eyes on the road, no matter how lovely that view off to the side may be. For this week's Moment of Science, I'm Dan Smith.
The month of September is Healthy Aging Month, but have you ever thought of ways to help your brain age healthily? Well, in this week's Degrees of Science, Brady Taylor spoke with a doctor that is a board member of the Alzheimer's Foundation of America to find out more about some healthy brain aging tips that could reduce your chance of developing dementia. We'll have a listen into their conversation right after this.
Help explain to people what the difference is between just regular memory loss and dementia.
So that is a tough line to judge for for most people, and it's very subtle at first. So it's sometimes hard to know. As we get older, and just even people who are overwhelmed with lots of information and busy with so much work, we can have memory lapses or moments where we're a little bit confused or maybe do some kind of silly things. So the question is always like, when does it cross over into something that is more ominous and that we want to be alerted that something's really wrong? So some of the signs are when a person loses their ability to use words properly, really misuses words, not just that word searching that you might tend to do, but applying the wrong word, using a common implement improperly or forgetting how to use like a fork or a spoon, getting lost in your own neighborhood and disoriented in your own familiar environment. It could be putting your keys in the freezer, doing something that's just not explainable easily by a lapse, and accumulating incidents like that. And certainly anything that becomes dangerous, like, leaving the oven on or leaving the burners on, things that can alert attention to the person or the family that the behavior is going beyond just a normal forgetting about things.
Let's talk about some of these habits that people can do to maybe help with something like that. So one very easy is, why is it important for folks to get out of the house and get moving around?
adults in our society spend 80 to 90% of their time indoors. They stare at computers and they stare at screens and they stare at phones and they're very sedentary. And we were not built to be like that. We were meant to be out in nature. And exposure to the natural environment has so many good advantages. It's very good for your mood and reducing depression and anxiety. It's really good for your heart, which is good for your brain as well. And it increases your vitamin D production because you need sunlight to get vitamin D. It also stimulates your senses and makes you pay attention. It makes you more aware of things around you. And so you're using your brain in multiple ways at once, more complex ways.
So as some people get older, they may lose contact or not visit with people as much. Why is it important for people to stay in contact and but definitely visiting more with friends and family?
So being in social interactions keeps us very much active and alert and gives us purpose in life. We're meant to do that. We're a very social species. So being around other people keeps us from being lonely. And it's an emotional support. When the brain is overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, isolation, it's very bad for your thinking processes, for your health, for your adaptability in life. Also, when you're around family and friends, you tend to have healthier habits. People maybe eat better and they might go out and exercise and do more things. So there are just many things that come with being around other people.
We know vitamin D is important. What are some different ways that people can get vitamin D into their system?
So I see so much vitamin D deficiency. I think some of it was during COVID, people didn't go outside. And also older people, for reasons we're not exactly clear on, sometimes they don't absorb vitamin D as well when they eat it, or they don't convert to vitamin D in the sunlight as well. It's very important support for brain health. And it's one of the vitamins that is a little harder to get in food. So sunlight is the primary source of vitamin D, but we all put on sunscreen so we don't get skin cancer, but then you don't get the conversion to vitamin D that we need. So some of the foods that have it are fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, eggs, fortified dairy products. And I say fortified because a lot of people just think everything with milk has vitamin D, and some of them do not. And that goes for a lot of foods that are dairy-based. So you need to check if you're vegan. It's really tough to get vitamin D. And one of the few products that you can eat, a vegetable product, is mushroom. And mushrooms exposed to ultraviolet light make a lot of vitamin D, but then you may not know if your mushrooms were exposed to light. So it's a little more challenging. So of the things, I tend to not be in favor of a lot of supplements because I think it's good to get what you need from your food. But one of the few areas where supplements may well be justified would be for vitamin D.
To hear more healthy brain aging tips in this week's Degrees of Science, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube or go to KWTX.com/Degrees of Science. Weather Extra will be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. On the North Carolina coast, a stretch of homes on the Cape Hatteras National Seashore are at risk of collapsing into the Atlantic Ocean. This comes as beach erosion continues and officials scramble to come up with a solution to the problem. Will Thomas reports.
Another home in Rodanthe is showing signs of the beating it takes from the Atlantic Ocean every day. The Cape Hatteras National Seashore says they have been monitoring this stretch of homes for months and they have remained in similar condition, except for the back decks on the northernmost house. In August, a report was released about potential solutions to this continued issue.
This isn't the first time that folks have looked at this issue, but there is this increasing sense of urgency.
Erosion is nothing new for barrier islands like the Outer Banks.
We have areas of the seashore in these villages where the erosion rate can be 3 to 4 meters a year. And while that might not be much to see 10 or 15 feet in a year, you look at a decade and realize 150 feet of beach just disappearing to the ocean can be very significant if your house was, an oceanfront house to begin with.
A working group of more than 30 local, state, and federal partners spent the last year and a half coming up with potential solutions to the issue of houses being taken by the ocean. For the Cape Hatteras National Seashore in the short term, it's about avoiding the inevitable of a home collapsing.
What we're really pushing is avoiding a catastrophic collapse. So we're communicating with all of the owners of these threatened oceanfront structures and requesting that they move or remove their homes before a collapse, and additionally have a contractor ready to remove debris if there is a catastrophic collapse.
In Rodanthe, that communication has been with 24 homeowners. For the North Carolina Coastal Federation, they feel there needs to be changes to current programs or an entirely new funding source to support the public safety risk of a house falling into the ocean.
Everyone has a stake in making sure that we don't have the public health risks, the environmental concerns from all the debris. So it's not really a win-win, but it's really reducing the costs across the board and the challenges associated with this.
7 houses have already collapsed since 2020, and there remain plenty more with front row seats to potential disaster.
And just in the past week alone, 3 more houses came crashing down along the North Carolina Atlantic coastline. This now brings the total number of houses that have been brought down by the ocean waves up to 10 since 2020. This home collapse you see here nearly took the house down beside it. Many other residents who live in this area are in fear that their homes could also become victim to the Atlantic Ocean. At this point, it's not clear what the solution is, and that's from all parties involved: homeowners, government, and insurance companies. Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. We'll see you right back here next weekend for another half hour of your top weather and science stories of the upcoming week. Have a great week, everyone. See you next time.